There's been a question that has been popping into my mind since we began this series starting off in 2024, where we've been dealing with the topic of what can we unpack from our lives that makes room for Christ to come in. Right? We've been talking about this example from Dr. Rob Reimer, who gave us the picture that every human being carries around a suitcase with them. And inside of that suitcase are the things that maybe we've established as priorities, or the things that make us up. And one of the things he said is that our suitcase is only so large that in order to make room for anything new, we have to unpack something. And so what we've been dealing with this message series is unpacking the things in our life that burden us, maybe shame, maybe guilt, maybe unforgiveness, these things that just weigh us down, and that to carry that load becomes tiresome and causes all sorts of angst inside of our bodies and our minds and our spirits, that we can unpack those to make room for the presence of Jesus and the things that he wants to be there. Maybe the fruits of the Spirit that are there: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Maybe it's his priorities. Maybe it's his way of looking at the world. Whatever those things might be that God wants to place inside of our lives, we have to ask the question, is there room for them? And so I've really valued this series going through you and just seeing what God has been teaching me and showing me. But there's been a question that I wanted to have asked, because if this illustration with Dr. Reimer is accurate, we've all been given a suitcase. I wanted to just kind of ask the question with this: if we unpack things from our suitcase only to put new things back in, does it change the level of the burden we carry? In essence, if I unpack my guilt and my shame so that Jesus can place in his joy and his love and maybe even his service, is my suitcase still the same weight? I think for some of us, we think so. For some of us, we oftentimes struggle where we try to carry the burden of what Jesus has called us to, maybe in a ministry context, maybe in loving a neighbor, whatever it might be. But friends, I wanted to come to you today and show you that when Jesus fills our suitcase with the things of him, that burden definitely changes. And so in Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28, going through verse 30, I got to tell you, these are three of the most hope-filled verses we can have, where Jesus utters these words: "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens." Frankly, as a timeout, I think that applies to all of us. Jesus is offering us a way out from carrying around that blastedly heavy suitcase with us wherever we go, that is filled with the burdens and cares of this world. He's saying, "Come to me, all that you are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus is asking us, he is beckoning us to come to him with our guilt, with our shame, with the anxieties and stresses and worry of the world, to basically exchange that for his yoke. Now, what is a yoke? I think that's kind of one of the more interesting things. Some of us might have heard of it. Some of us might have used it. Some of us might have never even contemplated what it is. So a yoke is actually a board that you would put across your shoulders. Maybe a dowel, whatever it might be. You would have strings hanging from each end, or chains, whatever it might be, that can either hook onto a bucket or hook onto some wood, and it helps you to carry the load that you've been tasked with. But one of the benefits of a yoke is it actually levels out the burden so that you can walk and carry it effectively. And what Jesus is telling us here is that if we come to him with this burden, exchange our suitcase, in essence, the things that are in there, and have Jesus fill it with the things that are of him, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Does it mean it's easy to walk the life of faith? Absolutely not. That's not what he's saying. But what he's saying is that when we are walking in Jesus's way, in Jesus's mentality, with the things that he ultimately cares about, that defines us in that way, that burden can be light, that the joy of the Lord can be evident. And then we would experience rest. And so, friends, I know that inside of your suitcases today, you are still carrying things around, because I think we all do as human beings. But as you hear that verse, Jesus is asking you to take the suitcase and almost open it up in front of him. Unpack the things that aren't of him, so that there is the room for the light burden that Christ wants us to bear. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. Will you come to him today and enjoy the presence of God?